Welcome, Intellect family. It will be me sharing my insight and hoping you can relate to it. Much love.
Can you hear
Oh
me?
yeah? Did you hear me breathing? I was like,
Yeah, I did actually.
how you
Finally.
doing? Man, I've missed you.
Just,
You have no
oh, miss you.
idea.
I've just realized my camera is in like the bottom left of my screen. It's like it's at this really awkward angle. So I'm trying to like.
Is that on your phone?
No, I'm on my laptop. Well, obviously my phone wasn't working, so I've restarted my laptop and it's all good. I'll just have to like talk.
Why am I at the bottom of your screen? That's me.
So you're not. My camera is. So like instead of
Oh,
it's
your
angled,
camera is. What
you
kind
know what I
of
mean?
laptop is that?
It's a really flashy Dell one actually, but I don't know what their deal is with the camera there. So
Man, I'm so
okay,
excited. Finally, it's
see,
been.
I'm trying to talk to you like this, but I need to talk to you like this. You know what I mean?
Well, don't worry about it. Just wing it. It doesn't matter what direction you're facing. So
This is one of my shirts. Do you like that?
it
Just a bit
looks
of
dope.
self-promotion.
Stand up so we can. So, wait, you haven't even introduced yourself, but yeah, Sara has a new line, Zazie.
Start. This shouldn't be the start of the podcast.
All right. Okay, let's get this done. So, what's good, Intellect family? So today I have a beautiful and wonderful guest in front of you. Not only beautiful, but she's smart. She has, a couple of degrees and masters there, a huge, lots of experience. So like super excited to have her on. Today we're gonna be checking out, what are we gonna be checking out again? Violence against women in Australia. So yes, so Sara is gonna be, I'm gonna have her on as an expert as well. She's really worked in various fields and various countries. So with further ado, I'll let her introduce herself and welcome to the podcast.
Okay, thanks so much for having me, Solly. I'm very happy to be on here. So I am Australian. So this is a topic that I feel strongly about and obviously have experience as a woman. Yeah, I think violence against women is way more prominent than what people realize. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking about it today.
Awesome. So would you mind telling us your background? Like what's your professional background?
Okay, so my professional background is in community development and also advocacy and action for human rights.
Mm-hmm.
So originally I was working in global peace building. So I worked for an organization that ran the largest peace education program in the world for kids. So that was incredible. And that took me all over the world. I facilitated that program in the Americas, Australia, and Asia, which was really, really amazing. I've got my master's in international law and human rights because what I realized after doing my bachelor's, which was in community development, and then doing some work in that field in Cambodia and Southeast Asia, I realized that I wanted to know more about the legal frameworks that meant that human rights abuses around the world were happening in such a prevalent way. And as you would know, as soon as you start working in the field, you just realize how common human rights abuses are, which includes of course, violence against women and gender inequalities and discrimination as well. So yeah, then we went to UPEACE and that's where we met doing international law and human rights together. And I really got a lot of value out of that degree. And I went on to work at UNICEF in Cambodia. But then most recently I've worked in the corporate sector doing corporate communications. So another Cambodian company, and I was on the board of their foundation, which did community work as well. So yeah, a bit of a mixed bag, but yeah, it's like 10 years now, so I feel old, but happy because I've done a lot of great work and work with refugees and yeah, lots of grassroots work, which I think is really important, really eye-opening to the reality of what the world is like.
Awesome. And also you are a mom. That's amazing. That from the last time I saw you, you weren't a mom. So it's a bit of an adjustment.
Yeah,
You
been really
know?
good learning. I mean, I think, when I'm looking at these, prepping for this podcast, forgot the word, podcast with you, when you look at the statistics and you really, it gives you a different perspective when you're a mom, because you just never want something like that to happen with your child. But when it's like 1 in 3 women are going to experience some form of violence, physical or emotional, in their life, then, think, it
It's
just,
actually,
it gives you
I think it's 1 in 4 in Australia. I think on Australia it's like 1 in 4, 1 in 5, something like that. It's crazy.
1 in 3 will experience crime.
It's 1 in 4 who've experienced, well, we have conflicting statistics, but I saw that 1 in 4.
But it's a lot. Whether it's 1 in 3 or 1 in 4, that's a lot of people. So
yeah, exactly.
Women disproportionately than men. I think sometimes when people want to argue this, they argue that, men suffer from abuse as well, which is true, but overarchingly, it's more towards.
I mean, it's dumb. I mean, it's dumb. You can't compare. Like, it's dumb. If you think about, if you just think about how long it's been going for too, let's say maybe now it's a little bit, in terms of what the abuses that men are facing are being exposed more. But in truth and in actual reality, it's been an issue against mostly the female gender that's been going on. And I think I think it was 1 in 5 in Australia experienced sexual violence. 1 in 4, it's emotional violence, and I think it's 1 in 3, it's physical violence as well. So I think kicking off the podcast, what we were gonna go into is that Australia is seen as one of the countries that's ahead in terms of gender equality. You guys have had, you had the first female parliamentarian in the world voted for, I think it was in South Australia. And so I think that it's crazy when you look at the numbers that a country that, it's very, how do I say it, a country that's very forward in terms of gender equality, still they experience a lot of cases of gender-based violence. And I think those are the things that we were gonna go into during this podcast. And as well, if you want to tell people what inspired us to choose this topic, because that's not the only area of expertise that we have, but why specifically did we choose this topic when we were initially talking about it?
So I think part of the reason that I wanted to talk about this is because this is lived experience for a lot of women. Do you know what I mean? And if the Me Too campaign showed anything, it was just how many women have experienced gender-based violence. And these statistics don't cover everyone. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's, I have been harassed. Do you know what I mean? Like harassment is catcalling, it's joke, people brushing past.
Sorry, wait. You have to kind of start from where it's like you said, like, because you kind of froze up for a bit. So you have to say that you were talking about how it's an issue that if you compare the number of cases reported to the ones that actually are happening, and you were talking about the different variations of what does it really mean, what is gender-based violence, right? That's where you are before you froze up.
Okay. So basically I was saying that, yes, there are so many forms of it and the statistics don't cover everyone that's experienced it. I think you would be very unlikely to find a single woman that hasn't had some form of gender-based violence towards her, even if it was something like people brushing up against you at a bar or a club, or like people making
in the bus, you're standing and someone is grinding up on you from behind.
Like I was in a bus once and it was really crowded, and this was in another country, but like a guy purposely rested his dick on my shoulder. Like it was so messed up, like on purpose. You know what I mean? And it's just like every single woman I know has had, okay, maybe not that example, some kind of example, which is why I wanted to talk about it. And I'm actually really glad that it's a conversation between you and I. I think women often have these conversations and lead these conversations, but one of my biggest standpoints is that men need to be involved in the conversation and men need to be involved in change. And I think, why do the victims have to do all the work to change it? Like, I think men huge role in being change champions as well. And we're seeing more and more men, you know, actively talking about this and raising awareness and whatnot, because gender-based violence is rooted deeply in culture. It's systemic. It's in so many aspects of life. It affects girls from a really young age. Like, you know, I mean, if you have a look online, you see all kinds of stuff about, like, you know, all these gender norms that are just put on children, not only girls, but boys as well. You know, the fact that you're born a certain sex, then you automatically get a certain color of clothes. You're not really freezing for me, so just tell me where I am.
Yeah, because you were talking about how it was the cultural and you know the gender norms where it's like, you know, someone like a lady is referred to more about how pretty she is and never really about how smart she is. So, you know, those are the things that you were actually touching on
Yeah.
before you froze
And
up.
even things, you know, younger than that, you know, like little kids being bought certain toys, or they have to wear certain colors of clothes because of their sex. You know, sex is the, you know, the body parts you're born with, and gender is societal. That's what we presume that each sex should be. And yeah, I think that's the kind of roots of just how discrimination happens, because, you know, little girls get to primary school and they're, you know, you say draw a picture of a doctor, and they will draw a male doctor, or draw a picture of a scientist, and they will
Well,
draw a male.
I don't really know if that's the case right now. I think that that's what
Maybe
has been happening as we were growing up. But I think that now things are changing because, I mean, as far as I know, a lot of my female colleagues are even doing better than me. You see what I'm saying? Like I feel like the opportunity gap. I worked in an office where I was the only dude. You know, I was the only guy in the office, in an office of like 6, 7 people. So I think that you have a point in terms of the cultural norms that are going on right now. But then as well, a lot of people would argue that, which is just a small side note in terms of just off that thing that you've said, that a lot of people would argue that even now the male gender is kind of, I would say, if I was bold enough to say, losing its identity in terms of like, because I think that despite of I believe more in equity than equality, because I believe that equal pay, I believe the right to vote, education, equal amount of opportunities. But, you know, regardless, I think that there's some ways, this is just a side note, not really going into GBV, but there are things that women do get away with that a man would never get away with. You see what I'm saying? So I think that in terms of that, I wouldn't just absolutely say, and I think that's an important thing when you're having the discussion between, you know, different genders, is because maybe if you are having this conversation with someone from the same gender, they will lean more towards how you feel because they don't know how we feel as well. And by no means am I saying that gender-based violence is more tilted towards men. What I mean in terms of cultural norms, and when you said about toys and stuff like that, I truly, honestly, and this is my personal opinion, is that I don't want my son playing with Barbie dolls.
why not? What does that say about you? I think that says a lot about you, actually.
Yeah,
So why?
yeah. I mean, that's my culture. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm not ashamed about that. I want my son to play. This is what I want. You see what I'm saying? This is what I want. I want my son to play sports. I want to raise my son to be able to support his family, to know that he has to be like the person who holds the pillar. That's the cultural background that I come from. But I do not want my son to punch his wife in the face when he got home and she hasn't cooked dinner for him. I want when he gets home and she's not there, or maybe she was busy and hasn't cooked dinner, just to have the patience to kind of just wait until she does it or help her do it. There's ways which it can be navigated. There's ways in which we can teach, our sons and daughters. I'm not saying that I don't want my son, my son can be a hairdresser if he wants, but it doesn't mean, I'm just saying,
So then what's the link between what you just said and playing with Barbie dolls? Why do you think that playing with Barbie dolls links you to anything that you just said?
Man, look, I'm just not buying my son a Barbie doll. That's not gonna happen. That's just.
It's okay, I'll buy him one on your behalf.
What
if you had a daughter? Okay, well then what if you had a daughter? What's your perspective about girls then? You have very clear what you want for your son.
Yeah.
Clearly disregarding what he wants for himself at a very early start, Solly. So what if you had a daughter? What's your personal, because I think this is interesting. I think it says a lot about you, but what if you had a daughter? What are your kind of preconceived ideas already?
No, my daughter can do what she wants. She wants to be a mechanic. She wants to play with cars. She's interested in cars. She's a queen. She doesn't need to worry about. She can be anything she wants to be. She wants to be an astronaut, an engineer, a freaking, neuro scientist.
So I think what we're touching on here is the idea of toxic masculinity and that men have to be a certain way. I just feel like a guy can still play sport, he can still help cook, and he can still play with Barbie dolls. Like if that's they don't
ridiculous.
Have to one or the other. Do you know what I mean? I think what you're talking about perpetuates these gender norms, which is what we're having the whole conversation about.
So let me ask you a question. If, let's say, you like go on a date with a guy, go home, then or when you're dancing in the club, right? You just hold his waist and you feel like a freaking G-string sticking up his waist side, and he's wearing a G-string or a thong. Are you gonna be psyched about that?
It's just like the craziest scenario, and it's not what we're talking about.
No, but are you gonna be? It applies across the board. It applies across the board. Or would you date a guy who has long nails and done like yours?
I'm not sure. I've never come across that.
See, you're being ridiculous because you guys want guys
my relationship and my romantic,
but then you want them to be manly as well.
I just don't think my personal relationship preference, which is irrelevant anyway because I'm engaged, but that's not what we're talking about. Do you know what I mean? Like using my personal example, using my personal life choices in terms of reiterating your argument of what's manly or not, I don't really think that's relevant. And I actually don't think it's related to gender-based violence.
Well, that was a side note. You sidetracked us. That's not me.
I don't think I did, actually. You're the one that went on a rant about your son. So you sidetracked.
No, I was just giving you an example that for me personally, I think that the balance should still be maintained. I don't think it should tip the scale to a point where,
What balance? There's not a balance right now. Do you know what I mean? I think that's the whole reason we're having this conversation, right? Because a balance is equal and there's not equality. So I just think this has touched on some of the things which actually do form part of the problem, right? Let's take a more extreme version of you, someone who refuses to let their son be who they are. Let's say their son was, to do something that wasn't sport, but they force their kid to do that. The kid isn't in an environment where they know how to talk to their parents and they don't know how to engage in their emotions at home. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sorry, I thought
just
you were
super attentive. I was frozen.
That was actually one of the things that I think is actually part of the reason men end up lashing out. And I don't mean this directly, what you were talking about, but in terms of boys being able to be connected to their emotions and be who they are and know how to express themselves in a healthy way, I actually think that's one of the biggest gaps with raising boys and raising boys who have healthy relationships with themselves and healthy relationships with others. Because I think if you're raised in a home where you don't learn from your parents, or you don't have good role models about how you need to treat others or how you express your emotions, then it comes out in other ways. And when you couple that as an adult with alcohol or drug use, then, that's huge leading causes in terms of problems as well. So I actually do think what you learn at home or what kids learn at home has a huge impact on how they grow up as adults. And there's research to back that up now.
No, I agree. I agree. I mean, in terms of, I think one of the most difficult things, but then, I also did read something that talks about how the chemistry, between the genders is different. And in terms of how, um, you know, each gender expresses, their emotions, or how they actually just come out and talk about how they feel, are not supposed to be expected to be linear. It is actually a proven fact in terms of even just how we think. So I think that those are one of the things that we do need to be conscious about when we do talk about, when you're talking about, for example, what you said about, you know, boys or men being actually able to express how they feel. And you also have to take culture into consideration as well. I don't think culture necessarily dictates how someone is going to treat, let's say, their wife or their sister or their mom. I think a lot of things also has to do with just, how they're raised and who they are as a person. You can find people coming from the most well-structured homes and still go ahead to, you know, to practice gender-based violence. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not an expert in the science in terms of the gender, but I truly believe that part of the reasons different genders act differently is because that's what they're allowed to be okay. Like think about boys don't cry. That's a pretty common saying, I would say, which is, then forms like as you grow into toxic masculinity, because crying is it's a healthy thing to do. Everybody feels emotions, you just express it in different ways. And the problem is when men feel like they're not allowed to cry, or there's something negative about crying, then those emotions stay within you and then they come out in other ways, which can, be in toxic ways or violent ways.
Well, that's a possibility, but we also can use other means to express those frustrations. They don't necessarily have to be that way. It's just the people who express it that way have no other healthy let out. Doesn't mean that, because I can't cry, I can't remove the frustration somewhere by working out, boxing, something else. Doesn't have to be crying. You see what I'm saying? It should be, if someone wants to, they can, right? But it doesn't have to be, you know what I'm saying? And I think that, for me, I kind of admire a certain strength that came from me growing up in a society where I saw my uncles and the people around me, my dad and whoever, kind of always try and be the strength in the family. And it's kind of like it's just like a figure of speech. Doesn't mean that they're not hurting. It's just they'll choose which should be a healthy way to remove those frustrations. And doesn't always mean that it has to be gender-based violence, but some people do take it there, because I believe some people, it's just that is a cowardly form of expression. You can be raised the right way, but if you're a coward and you're just a shitty person, it's just not gonna matter what you do to kind of educate that. How many people have you met that are educated and still behave like they're ignorant? The type of education, just the level of someone's mindset is essential to
Well, it's nature versus nurture, right? Like not everyone who's come from an abusive household is going to be an abuser, but there is a link between that. And I think that's what we need to focus on. And this is a huge topic. And, like all of these big topics, like it's, not one way of understanding it applies to every single person in the world. Do you know what I mean? Like there are common factors, but as you've delved into, it's not, you can't just, you know, wash it all as one.
Yeah.
So it's like when you think, I mean, we both personally know people who have like experienced gender-based violence. Do you know what I mean? And or violence at home, you know, in some degree. And I think even, you know, from personal experience, when you look at figures and you look at statistics on like a global top level way, and you can see everything, there are links that you can form, right? For example, like in Australia, the research shows that if children are exposed to violence from a young age, there are negative effects of that, right? And one of the negative effects can be that they then learn that behavior and then perpetrate it. But that is not going to be the case we're talking about millions of people, like hundreds of millions around the world. Do you know what I mean? Like that's not going to be the same case for every single person that's ever had to live through that. Do you know what I mean? Think about the rate of gender-based violence in conflict. Like it's just so broad. Like I think we can very easily go down to our like personal perspectives and argue about, you know, what are the outcomes going to be, and like, you know, this isn't the case, you know, because from our lived experience we've got different understandings of what this is. So I think there are some general things we can agree on, but then I think we also can agree on the fact that like every person's experience with gender-based violence is going to impact them differently and affect their behavior differently as well. But that's what you need to understand to be able to create change. You do need to understand some of those more general things that happen. And in the Australian case, which is what we're talking about, I think there is a toxic masculinity culture that affects violence against women. Lived experience in my culture and in the country that I'm,
So that we just try and kind of structure the conversation, otherwise we'll just bounce like from one side to the
arguing for 3 hours.
Yeah, I mean, so I just guess we'll just try and just like crack it down like a bit more structured based on like what we had just like outlined. And so what do you understand by, you know, violence against women and girls? Like when you think about it, what does that, if you could say it in like maybe 3 sentences, what do you think that would, you know, mean to you?
So my idea of what gender-based violence is based on, you know, an official definition from the UN, you know, which is basically around the fact that it is physical, mental abuse, it's the threats of abuse, it's coercion, or it's limitations through those things from preventing you from your liberties, basically. And it can be in public life or private life as well. But in terms of what that actually means, if you take away from a definition, the UN definition is very formal. Do you know what I mean? But
yeah,
I understand it as of what I understand it is what it is, as far as I know. We've got things like physical violence, so physical violence, which is obviously inflicted into a partner, which is very common in Australia, especially like interpersonal violence as well. So in relationships, basically. You've got sexual violence, which of course is the most, one of the most horrific forms of violence that you can get. And women are, of course, disproportionately affected by sexual violence. And again, that's largely, that comes under intimate partner violence as well, but also comes into, rape as a weapon of war and things like that in conflict zones too. But I will keep it within the Australian kind of framework. You've got all kinds of things related to emotional and psychological abuse that covers things from threats, controlling partners, feeling anxious because of the threat of, something that your partner might do if you don't do the right thing in your relationship, harassment, and also things like elder abuse. Elder abuse seems to also be skewed towards women in Australia as well. So,
you've got explain to people what elder abuse is.
So elder abuse is, it's abuse towards elderly people who are one of the more vulnerable, one of the more
groups,
vulnerable, in society. And it's one of those things that kind of has, the awareness and conversation around it is growing. The statistics aren't great, but elderly people have rights too. Just because you're old doesn't mean you shouldn't have access to your human rights. So I think it is something really important. And I think old people do become vulnerable, and they're so reliant on family members and things, and they are vulnerable too. And then also when we're talking about gender, we've got other forms of, can you hear that knocking?
Yeah, that's Zazie. No, Zara.
She's knocking on the door. She's woken up. That's a short nap. So
Yeah.
Can I get
Just
her?
let her in. Let's just let her in.
Uncle Solly, say hi. Hi, look. Hi.
Hey.
Hello.
She's like, who it is? Hey. She's so cute. She really is. Hey.
I just love her so much.
Such a sweet soul. So
yeah.
Yeah.
You think about setting a good example, like, you've got little kids looking up to you now. So, good one. Want to say hi? Anyway, going back to what we were talking about, we've got other forms of discrimination as well. So discrimination in the workplace, unpaid work, all the domestic work that people do at home, and then also online violence and harassment as well. So it's huge. When you really look at what is under the umbrella of violence against women, it's massive, really, really massive. And like I said, there's not many people I could think of that haven't had to deal with some kind of
violence
or violence in their life.
So I know we already touched upon it earlier, and what would you consider, like, if you were to just like break down, just like say X, Y, Z, in terms of what do you consider the root causes of gender-based violence?
Mm-hmm. So I think we've already touched on it, and I think it's quite.
But if you were to list them, what if you were to list them down? You've talked about culture is one aspect. You've talked about gender norms as one aspect. Is there anything else that you would kind of, let's say depression? I think that's one thing that could come in.
Yeah. I think, I think depression is a consequence, I think it's a consequence.
It's a consequence, it's not a root cause. You don't think that some people get depressed and start abusing their partners? You don't think that's a...
Yeah, I do actually think that, but I think in terms of like things like, I feel that people who abuse women have had life experience that have made them believe that that's okay, and they're not well. And I feel that drug and alcohol also doesn't help. So Australia has a huge alcohol culture, which I think actually is a huge part of the problem. So I think that's part of the root causes in terms of ours. Like I said, kids learn from their households. I think gender norms, like I said, and I also think victim blaming is a problem too. Maybe not a root cause, but I do think that's something that we kind of, needs to be raised, that women also blame themselves for sexual and gender-based violence as well. Was it what I was wearing? Is it how I acted? So I think, let's see how we can have this conversation. This is a serious conversation.
She's so cute. I was just trying to keep a straight face.
This is an important conversation.
So just because we kind of skip the script and kind of just like completely just blew up the whole thing, and we're trying to keep it short as well. The most important conversation, I think, is that we know this problem is there. We know it's an issue. What do you think would be the steps that we could take together in terms of trying to end gender-based violence, or at least not maybe end, because that I think is an issue like poverty and war and conflict, but reduce the amount of violence that's there against women and girls, whether it's in normal society or conflict societies. But in this particular case, we want to talk about Australia, like how can we, what would be suitable for the Australian society or the government or local actors and partners to do to kind of reduce I mean, to kind of reduce gender-based violence.
Yeah. So I think it's really important to know the work is being done. So the good thing is we have statistics, so we do have statistics. I'm 100% sure the statistics aren't 100% accurate, but we do have them. The government has numerous kind of campaigns and awareness things and programs to reduce it. We've got the Australian Human Rights Commission on it. We've got community groups oh my, these are like brand new earrings.
Hey, the life of a mom.
Life of a mom.
Yeah, and actually, congratulations on your engagement. Did I tell you that?
Thank you. Thank you so much. So excited.
Sorry, okay.
Yeah.
Continue. So what?
So yeah, so there are things being done, and I think there is good awareness about it. But there's always questions about funding. So from the top level, in terms of the government, there's always more to be done. Like there's more funding, there's more things that need to help the frontline services.
But that aside, what particular? Because maybe someone is looking at it. Okay, it's like this is what Australia could do. So maybe from that they can say this is what maybe we can also try and do ourselves. So for you, if you were to address the issue, what are the things you think, if it's going into the education system, if it's kind of putting programs out there on TV that kind of start, balancing that aspect as well, and kind of just attack the major virtual, maybe I wouldn't say videography, educational tools that can be used that, can end up changing the mindset of people in Australia?
So I think your first example is education is the most important thing. And I think it needs to be targeted at children, because I think if they're not learning, these values at home, then they should be learned at school. So I think parents have a responsibility. And if anybody is listening who is a parent, you are an example for your child, and it's highly likely your child is going to copy you. So try to create, do your best to, give your child good examples and be a role model for your child. And then on top of that, I think it needs to be an education program targeted at boys and men, facilitated by men. And I think it needs to come with the fact that, like, you can still be manly. What we were talking about before is like gender stereotypes is like, it's not unmanly to stand up to another man when you see him doing something wrong. Or, it is actually more manly to treat women well. And I think those kind of cultural understandings really need to be pushed from a very young age. And I think people are doing a better job. Like, boys are openly fine to say they're a feminist, which I think is great, because that's just wanting equality. And I feel like there is a push, but I feel like more men need to be involved in conversation. It needs to be education from a young age, because it's cultural. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that, we could go on and on, but I think that's good enough. And I think for whoever is watching, that we're gonna run this back as well on the same or different topics with Sara or Cowley, or soon to be. What's soon to be? What's gonna be soon to be?
I'd be more than happy to be a regular contributor on that.
Yeah, what's the soon to be? Soon to be who? Mrs. Mrs. who? Tunde.
Sara Shatunde.
You need to ask them to teach you how to pronounce it the African way. You're doing it.
My Yoruba accent is actually very good. Go and get it over there.
Try. Next time you gotta say it the right way. All right, so welcome. Thank you.
Are you questioning my accent? Rich coming from a Kenyan.
I'm really disappointed. How's your Spanish? Is it still good?
Oh, let's not talk about that one. I can say about two things. So.
Well, it was fun having you on, and this is just the beginning of many. So it was amazing.
Yeah. I could probably let her out of the room.
All right. So hey, this was amazing. This was, I had a great time. We're gonna do more short things like this, just quick in and out, but try and like push the point. Yeah. But yeah, I loved. I loved having you on. It was amazing. And really also you, cutie, you made it the best. You made it Yes. Bye. See ya.
Wave. Say bye.
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 Much love.